everybody.
Good morning.
Doubtless you have an impression of me coming from Greenwich, speaking the way I do. Big corporate honcho. And in part, that is true. That is right. And one of the reasons I'm running for this is because I have a lot of background, a lot of experience, frankly more than anyone else on either side to do this job, and I want to make my contribution. But what I want to tell you is the other part of me, what's inside me, the bit you can't see, not the bit that's from backcountry Greenwich, not the bit that used to be the chief financial officer of BP's operations in North America, long before all the troubles and so on and so forth. Not the chief financial officer of major 500 companies, not the man who started the business 20 years ago, not the man who ran for first selectman, ran for the Assembly, ran for the Senate, who's just completed 2 terms on the finance board in Greenwich, but the man who came from the north of England. That's where I was born. My father was a coal miner. That's what I want to tell you about. So, that is the dirtiest, nastiest, hardest, most dangerous working class job there is. I come from 5 generations of coal miners. Family came up from a place called Derbyshire back in the 1820s to the opening coal mines in Yorkshire. And that's where my family comes from. Thanks to public education after the Second World War, I won a place to Oxford University. Very unusual thing. And the reason I want to tell you about all of this is that 2 things. One is you should never forget where you come from. That is a very humble background. The first 5 years of my life, food was rationed. There we were, as you must know, the UK was the centre of a great world empire. Humbled by 2 world wars, the working class were on rations after the Second World War. Second thing is, not to forget those who might not have been as fortunate as I was in terms of taking advantage of those opportunities. And then the third and possibly most important thing that's relevant today is of all the bad things that happened in November of 2016, here's something you wouldn't know about in Connecticut, but it's something that's very dear to me. You know how the president went on about coal, clean coal? Clean coal? I mean, how ridiculous. He wasn't interested, by the way, in coal miners. He was interested in coal owners. The number of mines inspectors in the United States has gone down. Their powers have been curtailed. Do you know what has happened? The accident rate has increased. The fatality rate has doubled since November 2016. It isn't something you read about in Connecticut, but it's something that I pay attention to, given the background I come from. This is an attack on the working class, and it's not good. Among all the attacks on minorities and women and the LGBTQ community and all the rest of it that we know is bad about what happened then. So this is a motivation for me to carry on running. I've carried the standard for our party now since 2011 when I ran for first selectman, 2012 when I ran for the Assembly, 2016 when I ran for the Senate. And I thought it was done at that point. My wife thought it was done, as a matter of fact. But as things went on into early 2017, I said, you know what? There's still some work to be done. And I have a background to do the work in this particular job that needs to be done. So I'm sure you know already the components of the job: manage a big treasury operation, managing bond issuance, and managing the pension fund assets. So I have managed treasury operations larger even the state of Connecticut. I did the biggest high-yield bond deal that had ever been done in the late 1990s. Not the person who advised on the deal, but the person who said, this is the size of the deal, this is the deal. The person who chose the investment bankers, the person who dealt with the capital markets, the person who dealt with the rating agencies, the person whose neck was on the line if things went wrong. And so it was with the rest of my chief financial officer experience. Managing large investments, managing pension funds, doing things on a scale much larger than the state of Connecticut. So I'm running to a large degree on my resume, but I'm running because of what happened in 2016. I'm running because when we came here, land a great opportunity, and we took advantage of that. My children had a great education. I'm concerned about my grandchildren. I think we're all concerned about education. We're all concerned about social services, and these things are at risk. So here are some quick numbers. The amount of money that we had to put from our taxpayer dollars into the pension funds, the so-called ARC, the actuarially required contribution, was $1.2 billion in the last cycle. The looming deficit, probably of the order of $2 billion. Over half of the deficit is accounted for by the money we need to put into the pension funds. How did we get there? Well, there's no point in working out, ascribing blame and all of that. When we are where we are now, we have these underfunded pension liabilities. It is the major problem that we have. Governor candidates will talk to you about their visions. All these people that have visions for the future. I don't have visions, I have plans, okay? They talk about inner city development. Yes, that's great. We do need economic development. We do need to do something about infrastructure. But the big financial problem we have is this millstone around our neck, the legacy problem of the unfunded pension liabilities and the amount of money that we therefore need to put into the pension funds for that purpose. And so what can be done about this? Number one, improve the rate of return on the assets. This is something that I've done my entire life. There are two ways you do it with large money of this kind: allocation, how much goes into fixed income, how much goes into equity, and so forth. How much do you give to investment managers? How do you choose the investment managers? Well, let me tell you, when I was in operating companies, looking for those investment managers to invest in us when we issued stocks and bonds, you get to know those operations from the other side. Who's good and who's not, who's doing their homework and who's not. That's a form of experience that you can only have if you've done it. So these nice young people who come to you and say, give me 200 million, 500 million to invest, and they've got their charts and their graphs, and we can achieve this and we can achieve that. Only someone who has made those investments himself, only someone who has seen them operating from the other side has the experience needed to choose the right managers. Only someone who has worked on allocation, as between how much goes into fixed income, how much goes into equity, and so forth, can actually get a better rate of return. And finally, let me finish with the restructuring need. So, this unfunded liability, there are two or three things we can do. One is something called debt defeasance, replace some part of the unfunded liability with debt at a low rate of interest. That will save us money. Second of all, to transfer assets that are currently not being valued, assets owned by the state but not being valued by the actuaries, that we can put into the funds. That will reduce the required rate of return. That will reduce the required contribution that we as taxpayers need to put into these funds. And finally, we have the bond covenant. This is all esoteric stuff, but this is part of the plan. Specific things that need to be done over the next 4 years by the next treasurer, not the governor. Whatever he or she does over the next 4 years is going to be very determinative of the financial future of our state. And that final thing is the renegotiation of the bond covenant that was put in place in 2008 that requires us to put money into the pension funds. The problem with that is it produced a cliff, a fiscal cliff in 2032. If the actually required contribution is 1.2 billion now, it's going to be 6 billion in a dozen years' time. Completely unsustainable. We have to do something about it now. So that's my plan for dealing with the treasurer. I am the only one who has a published plan. You can go to my website online, Blankley4CT.com, and you can see my specific plan for dealing with these things. I'm sorry this has been dry and somewhat numbers oriented, but this is serious business that we've got on our hands, and it's for all of us, for pensioners, for taxpayers, and for children, in my particular case, my grandchildren, that we do this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So the first question is, how can you as state treasurer help the urban and specifically the black community in the state of Connecticut?
First of all, there is a fund in the state of New York, which is a technology investing fund, which is designed specifically to promote technology investments in the state of New York. Now, that is one idea. Only someone who has made an investment like that can actually promote and execute that idea. I invested in my own technology company almost 20 years ago, I invested in the technology business when I was with the mighty BP some decades ago. So I know about how to do these things. That is something that can be promoted. Now, if you think of Infosys, which was recently brought to Hartford, that is a technology business that we know. That is the kind of business that can be promoted and brought to our state. As state treasurer, there are investments that we can make through a specifically designed fund to promote new business. And now I mentioned technology specifically because that is where new growth comes from, okay? That is where new value comes from. Those are the areas where we ought to be investing. And by the way, not just in Connecticut, not just in our inner cities, but in terms of worldwide investment. This is where we will get the best return on our pension fund assets.
Great. And the second...
there's another one. From my shipping background. So I was Chief Financial Officer of the world's largest chemical tanker company. So I have lots of friends in the shipping business. And what we always used to talk about was, what can we do about getting trucks off our roads? And there is this special form of vessel called a ro-ro vessel, roll on, roll off. Big trucks can roll onto these vessels, be transported up and down the coast, and rolled off, getting them off our highway. Now, this is port development. Again, it's a great idea. But who can do this? It's someone who has actually done port development. I did a terminal development in Perth Amboy. So, that again, that is something that would impact potentially Bridgeport and impact potentially New Haven in terms of new business development. So those are some very specific ideas from someone who has done it before.
The second question, sir, is how can the Treasurer's Office assist, support, and empower Black small business and Black-owned companies?
Black small business and
Black-owned companies.
We already have investment opportunities from state tax dollars for such opportunities. If you're telling me that there is something independent of the technology-specific fund that I'm talking about, then that's something that I'm open to. I mean, this is, let's face it, I come from Greenwich. How many folks like you do I see in Greenwich? I don't. Let's talk bluntly about what we've got going here, you know? But this is all of us. This is all of Connecticut. When I ran for the state senate 2 years ago, there was an issue of education funding in Bridgeport. And I said, you know what, that is something that we have to do because that is good, not just for those people who will take advantage of such funding, but it's good for the entire state. And so all I can say is that from a philosophical point of view, I am very open to this kind of use of the pension funds. But with this thing in mind, let's bear this in mind because it's for you and all taxpayers as well. We have to make sure that the rate of return that we get on investments in the pension fund is adequate and supportive, because that has been one of the problems that we've had over the decades, not just that we didn't fund the pension funds, but that we did not get the highest possible rate of return.
Okay. Questions from the floor? I'd actually like to ask one about this one. So, in that answer, you know, when Ned Lamont ran first time, financed his own campaign, the way he did it was he took the interest off of one of his accounts and took it and used it to fund the campaign, right? So, when you talk about investing,
1% can do, right?
Investing, you know, and you have to have a certain rate of return for the pension fund. I mean, I've always thought, and I'm not qualified to run for treasurer, but I always thought that if we took a piece of the interest off of something, let's say it was 1 month's worth, and we took that money and invested it into Black or small businesses that created jobs or did technology in terms of your thesis, but they were Black owned, you know, is that something that's possible in terms of your approach to this office, taking a piece of it? So if you're making $100 million in interest over the year, whatever that number is, I'm just making it up, and you took $5 million and invested it with smaller companies or Black-owned companies, is that an approach that's appropriate in terms of how you would approach your job?
what you're trying to do is to take a portion of money that comes into the funds. It comes from dividends, it comes from increase in value of assets, and it comes from interest on fixed income. And you're trying to take a portion of that and devote it to this purpose. That isn't the way to do it. The way to do it is to say, okay, is it a $5 million issue? Then we'll take $5 million from the pension funds, or a combination of the pension funds, and devote that to the investment. It doesn't matter whether it comes from interest, it doesn't matter whether it comes from an increase in value of assets elsewhere in the funds. That is an unnecessary demarcation of where money comes from. The idea is, where is the money going? And I am perfectly open to the idea of carving out a portion of the pension funds to be devoted to this purpose, as I was a moment ago to say that a portion of the pension funds can be carved out and a separate fund created for new technology.
So would you say, though, that in terms of that investment, that could be for more social justice purposes, or is it completely driven by, I need to get a 12% return on my money, and so therefore you're not going to invest? I mean, in my eyes, if you have a new business that doesn't have 5 years of performing and getting 12%, then you wouldn't, if that's your metric. So what is...
So I've heard from others that we should invest according to our values. And they talk about this as if this is some new concept and something that they uniquely will do. And I say, you know what? That is forgetting where we are. $70 trillion of assets worldwide managed by money managers is done according to the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investing. So in the trade as PRI. Everybody subscribes to PRI. We, in our pension funds in the state of Connecticut, subscribe to PRI. Denise has signed off on that. I will make sure that every asset manager managing parts of our funds subscribes to that also. That should be an ongoing annual compliance. What is Principles of Responsible Investing? It is making sure that the environment is taken care of, making sure that governance is taken care of, and it's making sure that social issues are taken care of, such as representation, diversity, gender equality, pay equality, all of those issues that we as Democrats hold dear. It's already there and already in the principles that we apply when we invest our pension funds.
Thank you. And thank you for coming here. I guess I have to be as blunt as I can. Your opening spoke of initiatives that could lead to the turnaround in financial health of Connecticut. But even in the best of times, our communities, even when Connecticut's doing well, proportionally, our communities don't share in the wealth that the state of Connecticut has. So, and I have to believe that you knew you were coming to the Connecticut Black Caucus, forum, but your openings had mentioned nothing about what you're going to do in your performance to help our community. Nothing. Take notes here. So whenever you come and talk before a crowd, you got to know your audience that you're speaking to, and know that you're here and not hearing anything in your opening concerns me. So I'm going to give you one last chance, okay? Even though the answers you gave to the first two questions were general in nature, and any community could take advantage of what you offer. So specifically to our community, how do you think you can make a difference in the Treasurer's Office that will direct in some initiative that can make a difference in our community?
I accept your stricture, but I would hope that from the answers that I gave to the specific questions, you would realize that, and specifically with regard to education in Bridgeport, that answer I gave, specifically with regard to new technology investment, I would hope that you will gather from that these are initiatives that are dear to my heart in terms of your community and what can be done in these communities, in this city, in Bridgeport, and in Hartford. But also, guess what? In my town, in Greenwich, you may not realize it, but I have done a lot for, if you want to talk about specifically your community in Greenwich, the western part of Greenwich now has a new school coming on, it has a new pool coming on, thanks to my efforts on the finance board in Greenwich. So I've walked the talk when it comes to making those sorts of investments that are important to your community. But I accept your stricture. I did not mention it right off the bat. And you're absolutely right. When you address an audience, you should recognize who your audience is. And all I can say is I will do my best, because it is an issue which is dear to me.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. It's actually the second time I met you. You came to my house in Hartford in the backyard at a cookout that I was having for that.
Yes.
I feel slightly different. I hate when people come and talk to me about my community in some scripted way. I appreciate the honesty saying that you don't know, because it's insulting to pretend that you do. However, I think to the gentleman's point, you made part of a lot of the problems with this campaign is when you look at even the staff of your campaigns, not you just specifically, they're not diverse. So there's no one informing you and teaching you how to navigate urban communities. And this isn't specific to you, it's all over. There are a lot of opportunities to begin to look at diversity on higher levels in the treasurer's office. Right now, we don't see that. What would be your strategy to diversify your office, said Black people, women, etc.?
I used a phrase just now where I said I walk the talk. So my company that I set up 20 years ago, IT consulting company, is a diverse company with minorities, not frankly hired because they were minorities, hired because they were good at their jobs. That you have to do as a businessman. But I'm very proud of the fact that we have pay equality and that we have diversity in our employment makeup in my company. Second of all, my son, when he lived in the state, he got a job elsewhere some years ago, is a computer programmer, among other things, and devoted his time to imparting computer programming skills to minority groups in Stanford. And that was very specifically minority groups that he taught. So that leads me to the thought that if there is something that we really can do and should do, it is building on education. Education is the way to go. So you take the company I mentioned just now, Infosys, coming to Hartford. That is a component of training in that new field. So that is certainly something that I think we should promote. And I can say, from my own background, if I had not taken advantage of the public education that was available, I would now be a retired coal miner, living on a pittance in the north of England. So I've made something of my life. I'm very proud of that, and I want to give it back. And I'm hearing from you that you want to share in this, and I think, as a Democrat, that is a principle which I hold to very strongly. And moreover, I walk the talk when it comes to such matters. So.
One quick question about education. I think we all definitely agree that education is very important, but how can you help? You speak a lot about technology and it being the way to go for the future.
Yes.
A lot of us would agree with that as well. How can you help to make sure that specific type of education gets to poor communities? Because wealthier communities will always have, regardless of what the state budget is, because they can't afford. But for those communities who cannot afford, teachers buying simple school supplies for a classroom, there's no way they can afford MacBooks. There's no way they can afford the whiteboards. There's no way they can afford all of this advanced technology. So how can you, in the role as the state treasurer, help to ensure the money is allocated to these poor communities that need it and that need this education in order to succeed.
There is no way that the state pension funds can be used without getting a return, a very specific return on those assets. The state treasurer is the sole fiduciary of $34 billion. So I cannot promise to do things which it would be illegal or improper to do, because making investments, grants, whatever, that have no return, I could end up in jail. It's not because I wouldn't want to do it. It's because it wouldn't be right from the point of view of pensioners, all of you who will be pensioners, who will be relying on these funds. So we need to find a balance there. However, as a senior person in Hartford, I will be able to use the bullet pulpit, I will be able to twist arms, I will be able to say, this is an area where we should be devoting some portion of our state budget in order to do the right thing. And excuse me, there was one answer to the question the lady behind you posed. You know who my campaign manager is, right? Gage Frank, person of color from Bridgeport, all right? I walk the talk.
Okay, thank you.
I have just a quick question. So, it's actually more of a comment. So, out of everything I've heard today, you do have the most innovative ideas. I just think you have to find a really clear way of putting that out so that when people are listening, they're like, oh yeah, that'll help my community. That would help me as a woman. That would help me. Because getting trucks off the road and making investments in our infrastructure and the port system, we have an asset we're not using. That's an extremely great idea. And being from a country like Trinidad, I know how having ports started, really developing our economy. We're the third economy in this area behind U.S. and Canada. So I know how it can work, but I think somehow you have to direct that information out so we can really, really hear it well as to how those jobs would help. Those are going to be new union jobs coming online. That's an asset that's going to be there, and that's a direct investment that our pension funds, I as a state pensioner would love to hear that, that will grow our economy. But your message has to be really clear because honestly, your ideas are very innovative.
Well, thank you for that. I will do better next time.